Lecture 8 of the Fairyland of Science. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. The Fairyland of Science. Lecture 8. The History of a Piece of Coal. I have here a piece of coal, figure 45, which, though it has been cut with some care so as to have a smooth face, is really in no other way different from any ordinary lump which you can pick for yourself out of the coal scuttle. Our work today is to relate the history of this black lump, to learn what it is, what it has been, and what it will be. It looks uninteresting enough at first sight, and yet, if we examine it closely, we shall find some questions to ask even about its appearance. Look at the smooth face of this specimen, and see if you can explain those fine lines which run across so close together as to look like the edges of the leaves of a book. Try to break a piece of coal, and you will find that it will split much more easily along those lines than across the other way of the lump. And if you wish to light a fire quickly, you should always put this lined face downwards, so that the heat can force its way up through these cracks and gradually split up the block. Then again, if you break the coal carefully along one of these lines, you will find a fine film of charcoal lying in the crack, and you will begin to suspect that this black coal must have been built up in very thin layers, with a kind of black dust between them. The next thing you will call to mind is that this coal burns and gives flame and heat, and that this means that in some way sunbeams are imprisoned in it. Lastly, this will lead you to think of plants, and how they work up the strength of the sunbeams into their leaves, and hide black carbon in even the purest and whitest substance they contain. Is coal made of burnt plants, then? Not burnt ones, for if so, it would not burn again. But you may have read how the makers of charcoal take wood and bake it without letting it burn, and then it turns black and will afterwards make a very good fire. And so you will see that it is probable that our piece of coal is made of plants which have been baked and altered, but which have still much sunbeam strength bottled up in them, which can be set free as they burn. If you will take an imaginary journey with me to a coal pit near Newcastle, which I visited many years ago, you will see that we have very good evidence that coal is made of plants. For in all coal mines we find remains of them at every step we take. Let us imagine that we have put on old clothes which will not spoil, and have stepped into the iron basket, see figure 46, called by the miners a cage, and are being let down the shaft to the gallery where the miners are at work. Most of them will probably be in the gallery B, because a great deal of the coal in A has been already taken out. But we will stop in A, because there we can see a great deal of the roof and the floor. When we land on the floor of the gallery, we shall find ourselves in a kind of tunnel, with railway lines laid along it, and trucks laden with coal coming towards the cage to be drawn up, while empty ones are running back to be loaded where the miners are at work. Taking lamps in our hands, and keeping out of the way of the trucks, we will first throw the light on the roof, which is made of shale or hardened clay. We shall not have gone many yards before we see impressions of plants in the shale, like those in this specimen, figure 47, which was taken out of a coal mine at Neath in Glamorganshire a few days ago, and sent up for this lecture. you will recognize at once the marks of ferns, A, for they look like those you gather in the hedges of an ordinary country lane, and that long striped branch, B, does not look unlike a reed, and indeed it is something of this kind, as we shall see by and by. You will find plenty of these impressions of plants as you go along the gallery and look up at the roof, and with them there will be others with spotted stems, or with stems having a curious diamond pattern upon them, and many ferns of various kinds. Next, look down at your feet and examine the floor. You will not have to search long before you will almost certainly find a piece of stone like that represented in figure 48, which has also come from Neath Colliery. This fossil, which is the cast of a piece of a plant, puzzled those who found it for a very long time. At last, however, Mr. Binney found the specimen growing to the bottom of the trunk of one of the fossil trees with spotted stems, called Sigillaria, and so proved that this curious pitted stone is a piece of fossil root, or rather underground stem, like that which we found in the primrose, and that the little pits or dents in it are scars where the rootlets once were given off. Whole masses of these root stems, with ribbon-like roots lying scattered near them, are found buried in the layer of clay called the underclay, which makes the floor of the coal, and they prove to us that this underclay must have been once the ground in which the roots of the coal plants grew. You will feel still more sure of this when you find that there is not only one straight gallery of coal, but that galleries branch out right and left, and that everywhere you find the coal lying like a sandwich between the floor and the roof, showing that quite a large piece of country must be covered by these remains of plants, all rooted in the underclay. But how about the coal itself? It seems likely, when we find roots below and leaves and stems above, that the middle is made of plants. But can we prove it? We shall see presently that it has been so crushed and altered by being buried deep in the ground that the traces of leaves have almost been destroyed, though people who are used to examining with the microscope can see the crushed remains of plants in thin slices of coal. But fortunately for us, perfect pieces of plants have been preserved even in the coal bed itself. Do you remember our learning in Lecture 4 that water with lime in it petrifies things, that is, leaves carbonate of lime to fill up, grain by grain, the fibres of an animal or plant as the living matter decays, and so keeps an exact representation of the object? Now it so happens that in a coal bed at South Orham, near Halifax, as well as in some other places, carbonate of lime trickled in before the plants were turned into coal, and made some round nodules in the plant bed, which look like cannon balls. Afterwards, when all the rest of the bed was turned into coal, these round balls remained crystallized, and by cutting thin transparent slices across the nodule, we can distinctly see the leaves and stems and curious little round bodies which make up the coal. Several such sections may be seen at the British Museum, and when we compare these fragments of plants with those which we find above and below the coal bed, we find that they agree, thus proving that coal is made of plants, and of those plants whose roots grew in the clay floor, while their heads reached up far above where the roof now is. The next question is, what kind of plants were these? Have we anything like them living in the world now? You might perhaps think